Hey guys, welcome back to Inside Out Precision. I've been getting a lot of questions recently on what is my favorite release for hunting, or what is the best release for hunting. And really that's gonna come down to a personal preference, but there are some things you should consider when determining which one you think will work best for you. So we're gonna cover that in today's video. All that coming at you in 3, 2, 1. Oh yeah. Okay, so personally, I like to use an index style release for hunting. I shoot a hinge and I shoot a thumb button for target, but I like an index style for hunting. And really, there's the main reason is forgiveness. I would like to think that I'm gonna just sit there and be able to, settle my pin and just squeeze through every single shot, whether it's a hinge or an index or a thumb button. But the reality of the situation is, especially if you're kind of a beginning hunter or shooter, a lot of people barely even remember the shot. It's like as soon as that pin hits what they're looking at, they just kind of grip it and rip it. And to be honest, it's almost annoying at how much of a punch you can get away with an index style, because I think it lets you be kind of a sloppy shooter when you're practicing. But with an index style, even if that finger punches, that's really the only part of my back half that's moving. As long as I keep my head and my front arm in the shot with an index style release, you can get away with a pretty serious punch. So for that reason, especially in kind of an uncontrolled environment like out here, in Oregon when we're elk hunting, especially in the really thick stuff on the coast, there's lots of really small little windows that I'm shooting through. And I may need to, acquire the target quickly, get on that trigger, and let it go. Now, obviously, you don't want to punch the trigger. You want to keep yourself composed and really focus on settling that pin and squeezing. But in a situation where, my shot is rushed, which I know a lot of people are going to say, oh, you shouldn't be taking a rushed shot. But if it's 21 yards or 22 yards or something, and I've got a window that big that he stops in, you can get away with a lot at 20 yards. So an index style, in my opinion, allows you, it gives you the most forgiveness in a not ideal situation. So that's the reason I use this. On top of, it's always connected to me, which I like. Using a handheld, for example, like this hinge or this thumb button here, neither of these have a spot to connect a wrist strap to. And just knowing myself, if I had this in my hand and I was walking around, if I didn't have some way other than a pocket to kind of keep track of this, I know I would set this down on a log when I'm going for my bugle or something, and I'm gonna leave this sitting in the woods somewhere. Now, obviously there's a lot of handhelds that do come with a strap. That's totally fine. But let's get into thumb button. So the thumb button, I think, would be my second choice over an index style. The reason for that is, again, I think it's easier in a situation where maybe an animal is walking and I'm, start, stop. It's easy to just take my thumb on and off of that button, and there's no danger of that misfiring. Your adrenaline's gonna be pumping. You're not really gonna be thinking about your release. So to have something just kind of subconscious is like taking your thumb on and off the trigger, I think is kind of nice. Again, I think this is probably the second most forgiving release in a non-perfect situation, or when the release isn't perfect. But what I generally see when people kind of command a thumb release or punch a thumb release is that instead of just that thumb moving, or like in the index style, just that finger moving, what I tend to see is this whole hand kind of flinches, and usually when that happens, it comes down away from the face like this. So, from the side, it's going like that. And when that happens, depending on if you're right or left-handed, I'm essentially just gonna pull the front of my bow one way or the other. So I tend to see worse results with a commanded shot with a thumb button than I do with an index style release. Now, that being said, if you're used to shooting under a high pressure situation with a handheld, for example, you see a lot of pros shooting a thumb button or a hinge for hunting scenarios. If you're used to shooting in a high pressure situation like that with one of those releases and executing a good shot, then I see no reason why you couldn't. But for your average person who's just getting into bow hunting and shooting, like I said, you're not gonna get as much forgiveness on an imperfect shot with one of these as you will with an index style. So the last option is the hinge or back tension release. And I've really played around with the thought of shooting one of these. I shoot one all year for my target setup. I really think there's no cleaner shot and release than when you get one of these down really well. My biggest concern with it is really two things. One, that in the heat of the moment, I'm gonna just yard that thing back, and as soon as I hit my face, I'm gonna get too much pressure on those fingers and I'm gonna have a misfire. Or two, if I have to make a shot quickly, I'm not very good at getting one of these to fire in a second and a half. For me, my shot process with one of these, because I practice mostly with target, it's gonna be usually a 3.5 to 7-8 second shot process from the time I draw, anchor, and actually get that shot to fire. Now, that may not sound like very long, but in a lot of the areas I hunt, it's really thick, dense brush. And if I got a bull or a buck moving through the reprod, like I said earlier, I might only have a really short window. And for me, it's really hard to kind of start and stop again with one of these releases. Meaning once I start my shot execution, it's hard for me to kind of ease up on that and wait for a clear shot and then start again. Now, this is a total personal thing, but this is just my experience with one of these. So on top of, not wanting to rush a shot, because my shots don't tend to be very good when I rush one of these, another thing I get worried about is just there's almost like a point of no return with these where, that release is just, it's a fraction of a millimeter from breaking. And if that animal happened to take a step right at that time, or my brain says, oh wait, but as soon as I start to let up, I'm too close and it goes off. Again, a misfire is something I'm worried about in that scenario. Now there are a couple options to obviously help you with that. I don't shoot a click in my target release, but if I was gonna shoot a hinge for hunting, I would definitely shoot the click, meaning that, as I start rocking this thing back, it gets to a certain point and it clicks, and that lets me know that I'm just really, really close to getting the shot off. Because again, I would want that feedback, like, oh, you're pulling too hard, ease up a little bit and wait for the right opportunity. There's also safeties or releases that have safeties. So this is like the Sweet Spot Pro from TrueBall, and try and focus on this right here. It's actually got this little safety right here, and when it's engaged, I can roll this release anywhere and it's not gonna fire. And then once I get into my position, I take off that safety and start my shot and it'll fire. So if I was going to hunt with a hinge, I would definitely either run a click or one with the safety like this that I can draw and not worry about it firing before the shot. Obviously, the less noise, the better. So click, if an animal is really close and he might think something is up already, that little click might be something that helps him pinpoint you and take off. I don't know. I haven't shot one, in a scenario like that. So, again, there's a lot of people who do hunt with a hinge. I think in a more controlled environment, AKA like a tree stand or a ground blind, where, I've got my shooting lanes, you can generally see the animal coming, kind of have some time to compose yourself, think about the shot. Generally, you're not shooting a long distance. Most of your shots out of a tree stand or ground blind are gonna be 20 to 35 yards. I think a hinge would be a lot of fun. One of the guys that actually used to work here, and a buddy of mine, Wyatt, he's killed a buck with his hinge, and he said it was an awesome feeling just putting that pin on there, pulling through, and just tonk, and he absolutely laced it. So again, that was out of a ground blind, controlled scenario, and it was like 22, 25 yards, something like that. But he said it was a lot of fun. Now, again, this is all personal preference, guys. This just seems to be the experience that people have. Talking to a lot of guys, I've personally only ever hunted with an index style release. I've had good results with it. And like I said, I can only think of a couple animals that I've shot where, I can actually remember settling that pin on there and thinking, okay, squeeze, and it goes, arrow loosed. Usually it all happens so fast. I remember seeing my pin get on the animal. I remember it stopping, but I don't actually remember consciously thinking about my release. So unless you're really used to shooting a hinge like this, especially under kind of a high pressure situation, I think you're gonna get a little more forgiveness with an index style. So we get a lot of questions on this, what are your thoughts on a hinge for hunting? What are your thoughts on a handheld release for hunting? And that's kind of why I made this video. Those are my reasons, either why or why not to shoot each one. I think in the right hands, any one of them are just as effective as the one before it or after it. So let me know what your thoughts on this are. I'm sure there's a bunch of you who have killed stuff with a hinge or thumb button. And I'd love to hear your experience. Have you had any bad experiences? Have you had good experiences? Both? You know, I'm always interested in hearing what people have to say on this. So feel free to comment below as usual. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. It's really, really helping us out. Happy New Year to everybody. This is the first video of 2020. So yeah, let's make this the best year ever. Keep things going. Remember, precision is the decision. Keep them in the middle.